Hey squad, GooberTroy here. With the release of Swords of Legends Online approaching, we are nearing that point where we have to make the tough decision on which class to play. I've spent some time in the recent betas focusing on trying out each class and spec to get a basic feel and understanding of how their playstyles might differ. In this video series, I will provide a basic overview of each class and spec, highlighting the core rotation abilities and resources to provide a general understanding of how they feel to play. These videos are meant to be an introduction to each class and provide new players with some knowledge to help determine which class might best fit their playstyle. I will be putting out some deep dive videos in the future once the game fully releases, which will serve more as class guides. So if that's something you're interested in, please consider subscribing to the channel so you can be notified when those videos do go live. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the Spellsword. The first spec we'll look at is the Sword Artist. This is the Spellsword's ranged DPS spec, which focuses on creating floating swords which you can send flying at your enemies. Because this is a spec that doesn't need to stop to cast abilities, it has very solid mobility, which is quite useful in many different situations. The two resources you'll have to manage as a sword artist are Chi, which is a basic resource that recovers quickly over time and acts as a builder resource, and there's also Sword Intent, which will fuel your primary spender ability. We have several core abilities that need to be highlighted with this spec. First is Mysterious Swords, and this is your generic filler spell which generates some Chi on use. Next we have Crane Talons, and this is a skill that has a couple different interactions with our kit. First off, this is a skill with 3 different charges, and each cast will consume 1 charge to deal pretty strong damage, and once you cast it, you generate 1 Sword Intent. In addition, each cast will provide a stacking crit buff, which is capped at 3. The next ability to highlight is called Concussion Swords, and this ability has a lot of interactions with our entire kit. First off, activating this skill will consume some Chi to deal very minor damage. However, each activation reduces the charge cooldown of Crane Talons. In addition, there's a chance that hitting an enemy with this skill will leave a Shadow Sword behind, which I will touch on in a moment. But lastly, this skill will generate 1 Sword Intent if you use it 3 times in a row. For our next ability, we have Shadow Sword Focus, where activating this will cause all the Shadow Swords created by Concussion Swords to launch at a single target. This will deal strong damage for each sword that hits the target. As an added bonus, when you activate this ability, you will instantly generate 5 Sword Intent. For the last ability I want to touch on is Cloud Dragon Strike, and this is our primary consumer spell, which will consume Sword Intent to deal damage in an area of effect around the primary target. Channeling this ability causes you to consume additional Sword Intent to increase the damage. To give an idea of how this class flows, you basically never want to overcap your resources, in this case Sword Intent and Chi. Therefore, at the start of the fight, we would want to start by dumping all of our Sword Intent into a big Cloud Dragon Strike. From here, we might cast 1 Crane Talons to generate 1 Sword Intent and get the cooldown started, since we don't want to sit at max charges for very long. Next, to spend some Chi, we cast Concussion Swords 3 times to generate 1 Sword Intent and reduce the cooldown of Crane Talon. Afterwards, we would want to cast the remaining Crane Talon charges to get our crit buff maximized. By this time, our initial charge from Crane Talon should be off cooldown, allowing us to get back to 5 stacks of Sword Intent. Now that we have our max crit buff plus full Sword Intent, we can channel another max Cloud Dragon Strike. Assuming we were lucky enough to generate any Shadow Swords earlier with our Concussion Swords, we can then cast Shadow Sword Focus to instantly cap our Sword Intent once more, allowing us to channel a final max Cloud Dragon Strike. But let's move on to the second spec of the Spellsword, which is the Bladestorm. This is a melee DPS spec that focuses on many rapid hits while sustaining a bleed effect to deal damage over time. This class is a little unique in that while it may not have the most abilities to manage, they combo off of each other, which leads to different effects. The 2 resources of this spec are functionally the same as the Sword Artist's. Sword Mana will passively regenerate over time quickly and acts as the spec's primary builder resource, while Sword Intent acts as the primary spender resource. For core abilities, the first one we want to look at is Black Blade, which is a basic 3 attack combo which deals fairly weak damage and generates 1 Sword Intent on the final hit of the combo. Next we have Star Shower, which consumes sword mana to apply a damage over time effect in a cone in front of you, which can stack up to 3 times. Each use of this ability will generate 1 Sword Intent. This next ability is the core ability that everything else functions around, and this is Cloud Shredder. This will act as your primary combo starter, where activating this ability consumes 1 sword intent to deal moderate damage, but it immediately empowers your next Cloud Shredder or Black Blade by transforming them into different skills. Black Blade turns into Frosty Sky style, and Cloud Shredder transforms into Skyfall. Activating Skyfall will consume 1 sword intent to deal heavy damage in a short line in front of you. Frosty Sky style will consume 1 sword intent to deal fairly large damage from a distance and generates a lot of sword mana on hit. So in the overview, I mentioned that this spec will focus on many rapid hits to deal damage. So here's how that quick pace of the spec might look like. From the start of an encounter, we would start by dumping some of our sword intent with a Cloud Shredder, Skyfall, Cloud Shredder, Skyfall combo. At this point, we would have 1 sword intent remaining, so from here we would want to dump all of our sword mana on Star Shower to stack the bleed effect and generate 3 sword intent. We have to be careful from here though, as we don't want to overcommit to Cloud Shredder into Skyfall combos, as we'd otherwise run out of sword mana to sustain our sword intent generation. What we need to do from here is weave in Frosty Sky style to generate sword mana when possible. So for your next combo, it might look something like Cloud Shredder Skyfall into Cloud Shredder Frosty Sky style to generate some of that sword mana back, where we will then start spamming some more Star Showers to generate our sword intent back. But that's the general idea of the spec, which really comes down to resource management. Avoid overcapping on your resources while making sure you still have enough to fuel the rest of your kit. And that about sums up the overview of the Spellsword class. I really like how elegant this class looks and feels with the floating sword aesthetic and everything, but the general flow of each class feels really nice. I personally like the Sword Artist kit of preparing a big Cloud Dragon Strike feels very satisfying. However, the Bladestorm just feels like a flurry of attacks with minimal downtime. They really nail that idea of a balanced strategic fighter who has to maintain a sense of balance between aggression and reservation to maintain your resources. I have a hard time choosing a preference between these two specs, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Are you more on the side of Team Sword Artist or maybe Team Bladestorm? But I'm GooberTroy from Squad Up Games, reminding everyone to squad up and have fun.